Welcome to our deep dive into what has got to be one of the most fiercely debated, totally polarizing topics in recent football history, Arsenal's 2025-2026 season. I mean, talk about a cinematic contrast, right? On one hand, you've got the pure, unadulterated euphoria of ending a decades-long domestic drought. But then, on the other hand, it wraps up with this agonizing European heartbreak that honestly left fans and pundits completely split on how to even judge the year as a whole. Was it an absolute masterclass of a triumph, or a catastrophic failure of nerve? Okay, let's dive into this. To really understand the root of this massive football debate, we've got to look at the spark that ignited the whole thing. It comes from a fan going by the handle Rylester, and this comment went absolutely viral. They wrote, "Absolute nonsense. Managed to match Leicester by unexpectedly winning the PL after 20-plus years of drought. What happened to the quadruple? No FA Cup, no League Cup, and bottled the Champions League after stinking out the game with less than 25% possession and appalling attack stats. Football was saved by PSG." Now, obviously this is a highly polarizing take, but it perfectly captures how a very vocal chunk of the footballing world was feeling. And honestly, that viral comment leads us directly to the core objective of our breakdown today. We have to ask the overarching question: did Arsenal actually bottle the greatest season of their generation? Look, we're not here to pick sides. Instead, we're going to impartially break down the facts, the stats, and the context of this historic campaign to figure out if that heavy criticism leveled against Mikel Arteta's squad holds any real weight when you look at the data. So let's start with part one, ending the 22-year drought. To even begin answering our core question, we absolutely must grasp the sheer magnitude of their Premier League victory. 22. That number literally defined an entire generation of Arsenal fans. We're talking 22 long years of waiting, decades of agonizing near misses, endless rebuilding phases, and just having to watch bitter rivals lift the trophies they so desperately craved. Since the legendary Invincibles secured the title way back in 2004, the Premier League crown had completely eluded them. So when Arteta's squad finally crossed that finish line in the 2025-26 season, they weren't just winning a piece of silver. They were exercising over 2 decades of institutional ghosts. And this brilliantly illustrates why comparing Arsenal's title win to Leicester City's incredible yet totally singular miracle back in 2016 really misses some crucial context. Leicester achieved a one-off phenomenon, right? They had no prior European pedigree. Arsenal, though? Arsenal is a massive global club. They've got rich history, deep pockets, and one of the largest fan bases on the planet. For a club of that stature, winning the Premier League isn't some lucky fluke. It's the baseline expectation. Meeting that expectation after 22 years is a monumental achievement, not just a lucky break. Which brings us to part two, the quadruple reality check. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how starkly it shows the reality of their trophy haul versus their sky-high ambitions. Winning the league was, for many, only supposed to be chapter one. The noise surrounding Arsenal wasn't just about the league, it was about total dominance. They entered the season with serious buzz about a quadruple. But when the dust finally settled, the Premier League won brilliantly. But the FA Cup, lost, the League Cup, lost, and the Champions League, lost. They aimed for 4 pieces of silverware and walked away with exactly 1. Seeing it laid out like this, it's pretty easy to see why critics found an opening to attack. But hang on a second. Before we just declare the season a failure based on that checklist, we have to look at another absolutely crucial number: 0. That is exactly how many English clubs have ever actually won the quadruple. Not Sir Alex Ferguson's Manchester United, not Pep Guardiola's Manchester City, not Jurgen Klopp's Liverpool. 0. It has literally never been done in the history of English football. So condemning Arsenal's season as a failure just because they didn't achieve something historically unprecedented? Objectively speaking, that is an extraordinarily high bar to set. All right, let's move into part 3, the Champions League heartbreak. Because let's be real, the critics' argument wasn't just about the domestic cups. The absolute sharpest barb was pointed directly at Europe. This is where those bottle job accusations really find their legs. Let's set the scene for that fateful night, the Champions League final, Budapest, May 30, 2026. Arsenal facing off against a powerhouse PSG. The match itself was a grueling, tense affair that went all the way through regular time, trudged through extra time, and went right down to the wire in a penalty shootout. And in that shootout, Gabriel's decisive spot kick was saved, handing the ultimate prize in European football to Paris. Now, losing on penalties is always brutal, but it was how Arsenal played during the preceding 120 minutes that drew all the fire. So, the crucial point is this staggering disparity. Arsenal held a mere 24% possession. PSG dominated the ball with 76%. I mean, for an Arsenal team that had been heavily praised all season for their breathtaking, dominant, possession-based football, this was shocking. They were just uncharacteristically passive on the biggest stage of their lives. When that viral critic accused them of stinking out the game, they were pointing directly at this glaring statistic. Tactically speaking, letting PSG dictate the flow to this massive degree makes the criticism of Arsenal's performance entirely legitimate. Which leads us to part 4. Was it actually a bottle job? The stats are definitely damning, but you know as well as I do that stats rarely tell the whole story. Let's move to and see how this builds a very different perspective when you look at the deeper context. First off, Arsenal flew to Budapest just hours after their entire city had been preparing for a massive Premier League title parade back in London. Second, they were carrying the crushing emotional weight of having literally just ended a 22-year title drought. That is an exhausting psychological marathon. And finally, this was the club's first Champions League final in nearly 2 decades. When you consider they reached the final and only lost on penalties to an incredibly organized clinical PSG team while carrying all that baggage, well, many analysts argue it's absolutely not a disgrace. A heartbreak? For sure, but calling it a bottle job kind of ignores the immense pressure the squad was under. Let's wrap things up with part 5, fixing the final flaws. Regardless of whether you call it a bottle job or a valiant defeat, the fact remains, Arsenal fell short in Europe. So how do they bridge that gap looking ahead to the 2026-2027 season? Because that viral comment, as harsh as it was, successfully pointed out some very real tactical gaps. Here is Mikel Arteta's essential summer to-do list based on that final. Step 1. Attacking depth. The final proved that when Arsenal's primary system was disrupted by PSG, they desperately lacked a plan B to change the game. Step 2. Penalty preparation. Losing on spot kicks is a recurring nightmare for English clubs, and Arsenal absolutely must find a way to turn that weakness into a clinical strength. And step 3. Mental fortitude in finals. Look, winning a 38-game league requires consistency, but winning a one-off European final, that requires a completely different, ruthless psychological gear. Arteta has to cultivate that elite winning mentality within his squad if they want to conquer Europe. Which brings us to our final thought. We've looked at the historic 22-year drought coming to an end, the incredibly high bar of the quadruple, the staggering possession stats in Budapest, and the immense emotional context surrounding the squad. The Premier League title is undoubtedly real, historic, and incredibly deserved, but the European underperformance does remain a bit of a shadow over the celebrations. So I leave this with you. How will history remember Arsenal's 2026 season? Was it their greatest season of the modern era or their biggest missed opportunity? It's a fascinating debate, and the answer might just depend on what Mikel Arteta does next. Thanks for joining me for this breakdown, and as always, keep questioning the game.